wanted to thank you all for coming out. This is SheSays Austin's first event. Woo! Yeah, and I'm very excited about it. My name's Nicole. I was part of this organization when I was living in New York, and I just felt that it was really invaluable to me in my professional development. And since I've been in Austin, I haven't really found a different organization that could provide the type of content that you can get out of these types of meetings. So my goal is to have a monthly meeting that's centered around some type of topic. So my ask of you guys, since you're all here, is if you know of any inspiring women, like Heather, who I will introduce to you in a moment, who is doing something interesting in this space, who might have a point of view to share with the group, I would love for you to give me her information. I'll write down our email address on that board. It's SheSaysAustin@gmail.com. And also, if you know of any venues that would be cool to have events, I'm looking for any types of ideas you want to lend. So, with that said, I'd like to introduce Heather Miller. Hello. She graciously offered to speak tonight. She's been working in advertising for many years and eventually transitioned to the startup world. So I thought that was a great kickoff event topic given the startup prevalence in Austin. So I will let her take it away.
All right, thank you for having me, and thank you all for your interest in SheSays and also learning what it's like to go from the advertising industry to a startup. So first, as Nicole, I'm Heather Snoddy Miller. I am currently Director of Marketing at Able. That's my email. Please send follow-up questions after this. Happy to answer anything. And then Twitter handle, and then if you are tweeting, hashtag agency to startup. So first I thought I'd give a little bit of a perspective of my career so you know where my point of view is coming from. As you probably read in the description, I have been in the advertising industry for 10 years and about 9 months ago moved to a startup. So kind of going back to the start of the 10 years, I am a graduate of a school to be not named in College Station. I'm a 2%er, and the day after I graduated with a master's in marketing, I moved to Austin. I knew I wanted to work in marketing, and but I knew it'd be really tough to find a job. I didn't really have any experience beyond working at an accounting agency. So I applied for an internship, a public policy internship, and landed at the Texas Department of Transportation. And ironically, I mean, I didn't know how controversial toll roads were in Austin. And 10 years ago, and in 2004, I mean, there were protests, there were signs everywhere. And I was at TxDOT for about a year, managing really the kind of RFP, request for proposal, to hire an advertising agency to manage kind of the public awareness and communications for toll roads. Ended up hiring Sherry Matthews Advocacy Marketing, so I worked with them. They were our agency, and who ended up becoming my #1 competitor at Enviromedia. So again, my career goal when I was at TxDOT was to get to GSD&M. I'm sure you're familiar with the Love Field Airport in Dallas. I remember a billboard. It said, "Get to Oklahoma sooner." And I thought, man, that is clever. And you know, that headline really, I made it my goal to then find out who did Southwest Airlines marketing advertising. Found out it was GSD&M, and really made it my goal to get there. So once at GSD&M, I had kind of a unique role in account service. At the time, SBC, that's pre-AT&T, had 13 different partner agencies. So diversity agencies, direct mail, digital agencies. And I was the liaison between my creative team and all those other agencies. So I got a really good feel of how advertising works, how collaboration works. It was called Team SBC at the time, and actually won an award by Forbes. And then from after SBC and AT&T merged, I moved over to an account for American Legacy Foundation. They they really created the Truth campaign, which helps prevents teens from starting smoking. And then GSD worked on an adult cessation campaign. And that really gave me a taste of what positive marketing feels like. And so advocating for a good cause, getting someone to change their behavior versus pushing a product. And I really like that. But not gonna lie, GSD&M, it was 60-hour work weeks. And it was really fun, but I didn't get a raise in 3 years. And so that was enough motivation for me to make a change. I knew someone who knew someone that owned a small agency, Sentient Services, here in town. So month 3, I walk in the door, and little did I know the company was going bankrupt and I was being laid off. And it was a really small agency, 10 people. And it was like a blow, just that happening to me. But, I went on the job search, networked with people, and then found Environment Media Social Marketing, where I ran new business, managed Up Mess with Texas, and Car2Go, and several other campaigns. And I was there for about 5.5 years, and 9 months ago, ironically, I knew someone in the advertising industry that knew a recruiter for startups, and that's how I landed at a startup. And Outbox, I don't know if you've heard about it, or of the past Outbox, but we digitized your postal mail and let people unsubscribe from junk mail. We were here in Austin and also in San Francisco. And in January, we decided to shut down the company and pivot. And while it was a surprise, it was also really exciting to be on the ground floor of a brand new company and really seeing what it's like to build a company from the bottom up. So now we launched 2 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal. And if you know a small business that needs a loan, please talk to me afterwards. So really, when thinking about going from an agency to a startup, I had a lot of preconceived notions that really weren't true. And so I wanted to lay a little bit of groundwork for both sides of the coin, both industries and in startups, both agencies and startups. So scary. When I was thinking about making a move to Outbox, I heard, you think about those sensational headlines on LinkedIn or Entrepreneur that startups are scary. When in fact, 9 out of 10 do fail. People were asking me if I really wanted to work in the same room with all my teammates. Founders think they're kings, which is not true. And just a lot of people are like, this is so risky, But I found that to be false, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Also, I think it's really gray what a startup is. And if you simply Google the term, you're gonna find 1,000 different definitions. So I looked to successful startups and their co-founders and what they had to say. So a startup is a state of mind, says the co-founder and CEO of HomeJoy, a successful company. So the co-CEO of Warby Parker says a startup is a company working to solve a problem where the solution is not obvious and success is not guaranteed. A Forbes reporter says if you're generating less than $20 million in revenue, have less than 80 employees, and remain mostly in control of your company you started, you're likely running a startup. And I think one key attribute of a startup is its ability to grow and grow really quickly. Paul Graham, who is the founder of the accelerator Y Combinator, really makes this distinction that a startup has the ability to grow really quickly without a lot of constraints. And one of those really being geography. So is a local restaurant that's just as awesome a startup? No, it's a small business. And so is a franchise. So there's a distinction between the two. And I think especially with companies like Airbnb and Uber, technology is really intertwined into the startup community. And I think that's true in Austin. You're seeing people from both coasts moving here because of our tech sector. And just being in the advertising world, I did not know that there was this startup community that has this huge momentum growing here in town. According to this website, ATX Up, there are 177 startups in Austin, and other resources will tell you 1,700. So it's really, again, how you define a startup. So also lack of familiarity. 10 years in the advertising world, I didn't know one single person who moved from an agency to a startup. People maybe had gone client side and know that those options are pretty few and far between in Austin. We don't have a lot of consumer brands here. Some people went to nonprofits, but most people that leave agencies go to other agencies. And that's no secret in the agency world. That's how you move up, that's how you get better compensation. But it also creates basically what I would think is an HR crisis for agencies. And I think this video sums it up nicely.
Hey man, saw your spot last night. It's good.
Oh, that thing? Jeez. Thing was process. My God. First, like 6 month concepting out thing, and then once we get an idea that we like, we bring it up, we gotta show 80 million people who want to shove their
I'm glad it's bleeped
in there.
out.
It's like,
This
Jesus,
is the
it's not
language that you hear in
worker.
advertising.
You can't keep it over and over and over again. And then the client, what does that mean? Should we rethink the brief? Yeah, let's rethink the brief for the third time. I want to make cool, some awesome. Now you know what I'm making? Just plain. I'll tell you what, as soon as I get my book together, I'm sending them out to any place that isn't a ad agency, because I'm tired of this.
So this was actually a campaign from an ad agency in New York, and their whole goal was to get people to stay. And as part of this campaign, there's one for account service and producers too. They fielded a survey among people that work at ad agencies all across the country. And I think it's called The End of the Talent Rotisserie. And what they found is that about 25% of people who work in advertising don't love it. 70% of people think creative is so much harder to come up with fresh ideas than before. And when people were asked, name a creative brand, no one named an ad agency. It was Google, it was Apple. And as this chart shows too, like, why did you leave your last job? And growth was really the common factor. They didn't feel that ad agencies were providing that. So I want to walk through a couple of key differences in the industry, and these are differences that I've experienced firsthand. Again, it's my perspective, but it's also a lot of the challenges that I've faced in my time of transition too. And so if people ask me, what's the #1 difference between an agency and a startup? I would sum it up, it's do versus learn. At an agency, no matter if you're on the management team, which I was at Enviromedia, you have a roster of clients. And so you're always constantly thinking about, what do I need to do for this next client? And yes, you're managing, but you're managing in kind of a doing motion. And at a startup, and I have learned more in the past 9 months than I've learned in the past 2 years, which I'm so thankful for. But it hasn't been easy. It's staying up late at night, figuring out how to do something. I had never touched a CRM in my life at an ad agency. I didn't even really understand what they did, what their function was. So it's just things like that I think the advertising world, you feel a little bit insulated. You're so focused on your client that there's really not a lot of time to keep up with current trends, current technology. So that's been one of the most stark differences for me. So then client factor versus investor factor. At an agency, especially in an account service role, which I was in, people are, it is all about the client can make or break your day. And whether that comes in the form of an email, a phone call, a page at the agency that you need to pick up the phone right now. That's how agencies are operated. They all have pagers. They page your name if the client calls. So again, the client is kind of the ruler of your day, no matter if you try to hide from it or not. And then in a startup, an investor factor, think about it more in a soft sense. Investors aren't calling us every day, but it's our responsibility to let them know the progress of our company and to really be mindful of every dollar we're spending. Because employees, as an employee of a startup, you normally own, a small shares of the company. So you're thinking about the investors that maybe, invested millions in your company, but also every dollar that goes out the door. And multitasking versus focus. So of course, at an agency, and some are a little bit different, but you normally have more than one client. And so it's a multitasking game. It's keeping everyone happy and making every client feel that everything's going to be okay, the campaign's going to be great. And at a startup, you have this ability to really focus and drill down on your brand, your company. Flawless execution versus ship it. So at an agency, if there is one typo, you can expect that phone to ring. You can expect to pay for it in some sort of way if there's one mistake. So you're really set up to fail. And in a startup, we say ship it. If it looks good, it seems to work, we tested it once, okay, it's going live. And a funny story, we were testing a bunch of different landing pages a couple months ago, and we wanted to get them up as quickly as possible. So we'd get shut down by Google because we didn't include some specific legal language. And if that would have happened at an agency, I probably would have been fired. So it's just, there's some big contrasts, and each have their own, I think, differences. So creative versus developers. In agencies, creative rules the roost. Agencies are compensated on their ideas, and those ideas come from the creative team. And so, I experienced fights between strategists and creative directors about which direction to go with the creative. And looking at a startup, it's all about the development team, the engineering team that's building, whether it's a tool, an application, it's making sure you're working with them in a way kind of similar to a creative director where you want to respect their limits, but also make sure it's strategic. And I think Steve Ballmer really brought this point home about the importance of developers. He was the CEO of Microsoft for 14 years.
Developers, 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 developers.
You'll notice this is probably about So a few more differences. An agency, because you have multiple clients, there's got to be a process. And there is a process at every single step. And if you don't follow the process, someone will call you out on it. At a startup, it's really success-driven. You can pick your path of the way to get there. And yes, you need to have timelines and what we call sprints, where you have a goal at the end of the sprint that you're working towards. But you're not going to get your hands slapped if you miss one deadline. Teamwork versus one-person department. At an agency, I had a team of people that were working on an account with me. So I felt that the teamwork was maybe a little bit more close-knit because you're all working on the same thing. And I think that's to be expected because at a startup, it's me. I'm the marketing person. I'm responsible for the strategy of our marketing, for helping brief the team, from executing to writing copy to tracking it. So you're doing all things, and that kind of goes back to my first point about you need to learn how to do all those things really well. You've probably seen them in action, but you've never done them yourself. So it took some learning for me to catch up. And compatibility versus new tech. I have a developer in my office that actually came from an ad agency too, and she reminded me at this point that when at an agency, you have to build technology that works with like versions that were created 5 years ago. If someone's using an old browser, you've got to make sure it's working on IE6 or whatever the technology might be. And at a startup, there is just such an opportunity to really learn new tech and make sure you're using it. And at an agency, again, you're a production house. You're kind of churning things out, make sure they work properly. But at a startup, you have the opportunity, you need to be using what's new because you're a startup, and the opportunity to really learn those new tools. And the pitch versus traction. So at an agency, I mean, the pitch was something that I lived for. It is like the peak, especially when you win. But you're rehearsing with your team, you have awesome creative, you come up with a marketing plan in maybe a week or two, and then when you win the business, it's you're on top of the world. But at a startup, it's all about traction. And whether that's your first customer, your 10th customer, or your 100th customer. And it's getting kind of that market validation, or what we call product market fit, and confirming those things. Because when that happens, your product's going to take off. Your company's going to take off. One last slide on differences. Budget hungry versus budget lean. At an ad agency, I was always thinking about how I could sell in more work. So, for example, if I saw that our media investment, so buying media, was proving to increase sales, then we would work to put together a plan to prove to the client they needed to invest more in media. And it's like also throwing out new ideas for new projects that the client didn't even ask for to help, again, grow the business. But in a startup, you want to be really careful about spending a dollar. Again, with startups, their number one, I think, competing factor is time, and really reaching product market fit before the money runs out. So that's going through your mind too. My co-founders have taught me this next lesson: lips sealed versus let's talk. So at an ad agency, because your ideas really are your capital, you don't want to talk about them. Even with maybe someone else in the same room who's working on a different account. You just want to hold them so close because that's all you really have to win the business. Obviously relationship and other factors too, but your lips sealed. And I think there's some collaboration going on in the industry here in Austin, but I guarantee you a GSE&M and a McGarrett Jesse is not collaborating on a project. And that's because they're competitors. In a startup, my co-founders, that we will tell everyone about our business model. And at first I was like, I don't feel comfortable doing this. I'm telling a secret I shouldn't be. When in fact, that's how you learn quicker. By talking to more people, whether it's other entrepreneurs or other marketing experts. That's how that you get really quick feedback, so then you can correct course maybe and keep moving forward. So that's been really fun to be able to chat more about what I'm doing. Again, deadlines versus self-starter. Everything in an ad agency is really deadline driven. And at a startup, you are your own department. So you've really got to push forward and come to work every day with that in mind. And consolidation versus independence. So, 4 media conglomerates own about 2/3 of all advertising agencies in the US. And granted, that's not a lot of the smaller agencies here in Austin, but that is your LatinWorks, your GSD&M, and others. And so at a startup, it's a little bit ironic because obviously startups, there's a lot, they're like seeding, budding, they're independent spirit, but sometimes the end goal of the startup is to be acquired by one of those big consolidators. So key similarities, putting this presentation together, just reflecting on, there actually are more similarities than I would have thought, but they don't outweigh the differences. So number one, culture is key. These two industries are fun. Whether it's a pumpkin carving contest of big techs burning, or, you know, as a team doing bike rides for the Hill Country Ride for AIDS, or parking 300 car-to-goes on a San Diego night at 3 a.m. when the client's like, where are you? It's just a fun culture. And that rings true for a startup. When we decided as a company we were pivoting, we all put our computers down and we went and watched Gravity, and that was like our rebirth process. So I think it's something that you're gonna find in both industries, and that's why sometimes, you know, they're included maybe in media stories and things like that. And also because it's a young tech-minded demographic. So both industries really appreciate a younger person who's interested in trends, who labor is a little bit cheaper, and it's going to work really hard because both industries require a lot of hours and a lot of work. And in lieu of the Tour de France race to innovate, industries or agencies, I mean, it is a nightmare if you, from a creative perspective, if you hear or tell them, I think I've seen that campaign before. You always have to come up with something new. And same thing goes for a startup. That's the whole premise of the company, is coming up with something disruptive, a disruptive product that's, you know, going to change the game of a certain industry. And risk, you know, that's what everyone told me, and, you know, it was my #1 concern about going to a startup. But, you know, a pivot from a company also may seem risky, but compared to 5 rounds of agency layoffs that I've been through in my career, it doesn't feel risky at all. You know, I don't think there's many agencies that can say, we are going to be alive at least for 2 or 3 years. Because the way that contracts are drawn now with agencies, you're on an hourly fee and maybe even a month. It's very rare that you find these 1 or 2 year contracts now without the client's ability to get out really quick. And the lingo. Something, if you're thinking about entering either of these agencies, you got into the lingo, and they each have their own. In the startup world, MVP, not most valuable player, it's most valuable product. So it's what you can take to market doing the least amount of work. And then there's angels, growth hacking, traction, term sheet, seed round. And at an agency, you'll hear comp, RFP, which is request for proposal, call to action, GRP, gross rating point, rough cut, geofencing. So if you're thinking about entering one of these industries, just know the lingo, because there is one. And you'll hear it over and over. And there's obviously a lot of acronyms too. And both industries, unfortunately, share in the fact that there is a scarcity of females. And I think Mike Judge's Silicon Valley show, which on HBO, really drives this point home.
If you want to live here, you've got to deliver. Like Steve.
Jobs or Wozniak? Steve Jobs or Steve?
No, I heard you.
Which one?
Jobs.
Jobs was a poser. He didn't even write code.
Silicon Valley is the cradle of innovation.
Your compression algorithm blew our engineering team away.
We have the resources to take what you have done to the global level.
I'm prepared to give you $200,000.
$600,000 for
10% of your company.
$10 million.
We had a guy in here in almost the exact same situation. Take the money or keep the company.
He shot himself because he turned down the money.
Yeah. Or no, he took the money. Or no. No, he did not. You know what? I don't remember. But whatever it was, he regretted it so much that he ended up shooting himself, and now he's blind.
For thousands of years, guys like us have gotten their kicked out of this.
Get out of here.
What if we built our own company? Ultimately, what we're trying to do is,
You remind me of my son. He's got Asperger's, too.
I don't.
What do you guys do here?
What do we do? All those YouPorn 1s and 0s streaming directly to your shitty little smartphone. Every dipshit who shits his pants if he can't get Skrillex in under 12 seconds. It's not magic, it's talent and sweat. That's what the we do.
saw one female in that trailer, and she's a stripper. And a couple months ago, a report came out about Google. 30% of their employees are female. And if you look more specifically into tech jobs, it's around 17%. And the advertising industry isn't much different. Women control 80% of spending, yet only represent 3% of creative directors at ad agencies. So we have to ask ourselves why. And I think it's groups like this that really can help ask these tough questions and help move the needle forward in both industries. So in doing a little bit more research about this, it's really lack of mentorship. And even in the advertising agency, I mean, it's still where some of my best friends work, it's hard to find a mentor. And I think the same rings true at a startup, especially as a female, because there are not that many females at a startup. So that's something that we all can improve here in this room. Also, a woman, the other career is calling to be a mom, and that's kind of right at that critical time in your career where, you know, work-life balance and other factors come into mind. And then education, only 18% of computer science degrees are by females. So it's doing things like encouraging females to get involved in computer science and tech at a younger age. And thick-skinned, in both of these industries, you have to have a certain type of personality where you're confident and that you do have thick skin. So something to keep in mind. Job creation. Both industries are doing great for Austin. This is a headline from Advertising Age, probably about a month ago. When it comes to ad towns, don't mess with Austin, Texas. And that's actually a trademark violation of don't mess with Texas. But TechSoup might send them a cease and desist letter. But it's interesting. Look, they bring in the Texas sector. So home is South by Southwest. Next week are the 2014 Small Agency Awards here in Austin, sponsored by Ad Age. Boasts booming ad scene, hot tech sector. So among ad agencies are responsible for about 2,000 jobs here in Austin, and startups are responsible for an estimated 1,000. And both are growing. So both of these industries are really key to shaping who Austin is, and they're vital for our future. Austin has had some great success with companies, startups that have made billion-dollar exits. And I think back when GSD&M started in '71, they really set the stage for drawing the creative class to Austin. So it's the responsibility of both industries to keep that going. So thinking big, I think there's an opportunity for both industries to help one another. I think a lot of people in Austin have experienced that a rising tide lifts all boats. If advertising is doing good, startups are probably most likely doing good too. And so ways that we could help and learn from each other more are, could startups save the dying agency model? So agencies' margins have been reduced by half since 2008. And there's a theory that agencies are going to be forced to go to a value-based compensation model. So meaning that they are paid for their performance. And that could be an entry point for agencies to start working with startups. Because from a startup's perspective, you have to be so careful with the money you have. You can't, and hiring an agency is really cost prohibitive. So that's potentially a way that we may see these industries working more together. And then could agencies decrease startup failures? Because startups can't afford agencies, is there a way that maybe it's a smaller scaled version, but agencies have great resources in terms of research, strategy, and creative teams to help startups succeed? And together, can we come together to solve some of our city's challenges? Transportation comes to mind off the top of my head, but there's an opportunity to work closer to one another. And then can we improve the male to female ratio? I think Austin's a city where we can make a bigger impact than maybe a San Francisco or New York. So there's great opportunity. And my last thought is, 10 years ago when my goal was to work at GSD&M, it seemed like everyone wanted to work at GSD&M, and I think that still really holds true. I think they get an insane amount of resumes every day, but it's starting to feel like startups are the new agency in town. Like, people want to work at startups, and that's exciting for this city. Maybe not so good for agencies, but I really see the pendulum swinging. So that's it, and I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A.
For sure.
Anyone has any questions? Yeah.
So you said you worked with a recruiter to kind of jump into the startup. I think that's a big fear is how do you kind of find a startup that suits you to make that change. It's really easy to be like, oh, okay, here's the agencies in town and I'm gonna make a change. But
yeah, good question. Some things that I would consider are what's the startup's product? So figuring out a product that you respect and you feel like you believe in exactly, and start there. And again, startups are much more open to talking and meeting with people versus an agency. So I would say don't be afraid to find out who one of the founders are, or who works there, and reach out to them directly. And then afterwards, if you want to send me an email too, I can share a list of some startup recruiters that I know. Cool. Any more questions? Yeah.
A mentor that kind of helped you with goal setting and questions along the way?
When I was at GSD&M, I had a really good boss who helped steer me in the right direction. At Environment Media, I really didn't have a mentor, and that's probably one of the reasons that I was looking to leave. And I sometimes would go back to that old boss at GSD&M to give me some feedback. But I've experienced that kind of lack of mentorship throughout my career. So I'm still looking. Yes.
Did something happen that made you ultimately want to join a startup, or did it just kind of fall into your lap and you thought it was fun?
Yeah. If you would have asked me a year ago if I would think that I'd see myself in a startup, my answer probably would have been no. I think because I was looking and a friend in the advertising industry lived next door to someone who was a recruiter for startups. I mean, I feel very fortunate that happened. And I can't predict if something else would have come along that I would have gone a different route. I really believed about what Outbox was doing, who Outbox stood for, and that was disrupting a really archaic industry, and I love that. At Environment Media, I had government clients, and just the bureaucracy and red tape, I felt it firsthand, so that really appealed to me.
Yeah. What advice would you have for someone that was looking to transition from the agency world to a startup, and specifically a woman trying to do so?
Yeah, there's actually some great resources to learn about the startup community. Josh Bear, he's co-founder of Capital Factory. He has an Austin Startup Digest, and it's really like a weekly newsletter that tells you what's going on in the startup community. He also has a presentation, Intro to the Austin Tech Scene, which is really good. And there's Austin startup events. But I would also recommend finding someone that works in a startup and talking to them. Interview people that are working in whatever role you want, whether it's marketing or something else at a startup, and get a feel from them what it's like. And if anyone really, please email me after this, and I'd be happy to help make intros or do anything I can. Did you have a question?
Do you see yourself staying on the startup career path?
Yeah.
The next few years or the rest of your career?
Yeah, good question. In the immediate, yes. like, I have always sought challenges, and a startup has definitely delivered on being a challenge for me. So hopefully able, we think it's a company that's going to scale and do really well. And the only way I can control that is do a great job. So in the immediate near future, yes. In 10 years, I think I need to learn how to code if I want to work at a startup. I would say that'd be like my one career thing that I wish I would have done sooner, and I still haven't done it. Is to learn just some basic coding things, so I can change the copy on the website. So I have control versus have to ask the developers.
I think you kind of just answered my question, kind of, sort of. But I was going to ask, you being who you are now, what advice would you give yourself back then, starting out, like, as a young professional woman, like in the first 5 years of your career?
Oh, that's a good question. I think networking, number one. I don't think I was so wrapped up in being in GSD&M and having fun and work, we'd work 60 hours and then honestly we would go hang out afterward. And so I think I wish I would have started making different connections in the city sooner in my career versus a little bit later. Let's see. At GSD&M, I ran from something versus ran to something, if that makes sense. And some of the best advice an HR person has given me is really think about that and run to something that you're really going to be proud of and love versus just, I don't feel like I'm being compensated fairly, I need to go. Those are the things that come to the top of my mind. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, this is kind of personal, but it's one thing that I think people worry about a lot is compensation from an agency to a startup. Was that a factor in your, is it possible to make like at least an even switch?
Yes. And yes, but it all goes back to the startup's position. So if it's all about what stage are they in terms of raising money? How many employees are already there? What does the burn rate look like? Meaning how much money are they spending a month until when they're going to run out? So it depends. Yeah. But people that I've now met in the startup community, the compensation is fair to me. Well, yeah.
It's highly competitive too. Like they're all trying to get you to come work for them. So right now, some of them are really giving you the incentives that you might not have seen a couple of years ago because there's only so much talent that has certain kinds of experiences here.
Yeah, and what I found too is that I am motivated. Money is motivating to me, and to own and to own 1% of a company that keeps me motivated. Versus like wishing I was going to get a bonus because the agency's doing good. So.
I have one more question. Yeah. How did you translate your roles and responsibilities at an agency to the startup now that you have like a larger breadth of roles and responsibilities?
Yeah. First, in a way, it's like project management. I think just coming from that being the focus of an agency and making sure that things are done in the right order, that's first what I brought. And there's a couple of days where at Outbox I had the opportunity to just do research, which I really appreciated. I had never had that time at an agency to do that. I would also say just relationships. So working with a creative team is similar to working with engineers now. It's about give and take, respect for one another's roles. And now, it's kind of at a point too of figuring out, there's things I'm good at, but there's things that a startup needs, that our company needs, that I don't know how to do. So figuring out if it's better for me to learn those things, or if we need to find, whether it's a consultant or an advisor to help us. So I think it's just acknowledgement of that. Because I'm one of the people that, I'll figure it out. And that's really not the fastest way to learn. All right. so much for your time and great things.